The widow had no place to sleep. What kind of heartbreak drives a woman to wander the night with nothing but her newborn in her arms, turned away by family, left with no fire, no bed, no refuge? How does it feel when the world tells you that you are too heavy, too old, too unwanted, and still life demands that you endure? And yet, what if the very thing she had been denied all her life? Belonging, love, a family came not from where she expected, but from 7 small voices in the dark whispering just one word: stay. What happened after that night, and how did Clara's life change forever? The wind across Montana did not simply blow, it prowled. It scraped the paint off shutters, whistled through fence rails, and carried loneliness across the valley the way a crow carries news. That night Clara felt it most of all. 50 years old, wrapped in a faded shawl, she sat on the church steps with nothing but an old carpet bag at her side. Her in-laws had pushed her out just a week after her husband's burial. "A mouth we can't afford," they said, as though she had never cooked their meals, washed their children, or mended their shirts. They left her with no deed, no coin, and no roof. So here she was, a widow with nowhere to go, waiting under a sky too large to care. Clara had been denied before by men who wanted a prettier wife, by kin who wanted her labor but not her presence, by neighbors who whispered too old and too heavy. She had learned to bow her head, swallow the words that rose, and keep her dignity wrapped tight like a quilt she refused to trade away. But even dignity can't warm frozen hands. That night she tucked them deep into her sleeves and whispered to herself, "Just until morning." The street was empty, save for one wagon rattling in from the prairie. The lantern swung as it stopped. A tall rancher stepped down Thomas, though she didn't know his name yet. His face was weathered, his eyes shadowed by loss. But he wasn't alone. Behind him clambered 7 children of different ages, carrying baskets, pails, and the kind of restless energy only children have, even on cold nights. They saw her first. A girl of maybe 12 tilted her head braid, tumbling down her back. A boy clutched a loaf of bread, staring with wide, curious eyes. And the smallest, a freckled girl missing her front teeth, tiptoed right up to Clara and whispered the word that broke her heart open: "Stay." The others crowded closer, their voices overlapping. "She looks cold, Pa. We got quilts enough. Can't she come with us?" Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to refuse. She had been taught all her life that she was a burden, too much, never enough. Yet these children, strangers, saw not a burden, but someone worth sheltering. Thomas set the lantern on the step, meeting Clara's gaze. He didn't speak quickly, didn't command. His voice, when it came, was steady and low. "It's a mile to our place. The stove's still warm. You don't owe us a thing, just take a rest. One night, that's all." Clara hesitated. Pride told her to keep walking, to prove she needed no one. But the children's eyes, bright with trust, soft with innocence, pulled at something buried deep. "Just until morning," she whispered again. Thomas held out his coat. The children gathered around her, forming a small circle against the wind. For the first time in years, Clara felt less alone. If the first kindness in years comes from children who whisper, "Stay," what happens when she dares to accept it? The road to the ranch stretched across the moonlit prairie, a ribbon of pale dirt between sleeping fields. Clara sat in the wagon, her carpet bag at her feet, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The children huddled close, their chatter filling the silence she could not yet break. She expected ridicule, questions, or whispers, but what she heard instead were small, ordinary voices. "Pa fixed the fence today. I caught a rabbit near the creek. Don't sit on that board, it creaks." They spoke to each other, but they leaned toward her, as though waiting for her to join. The littlest girl, freckles shining, even in the lantern light, leaned against Clara's arm and sighed as though she had always belonged there. Clara's chest ached with a warmth she didn't trust. "Don't let it fool you," she warned herself. One night. Just one night. When they reached the ranch, the lanterns of the house glowed like beacons in the dark. The home was not grand, but it stood steady, the kind of place where wind could howl and still not find a way in. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of wood and stew. Inside, Clara blinked at the warmth. Quilts draped over chairs, boots scattered near the hearth. A cat lifted its head from the rug, yawned, and promptly went back to sleep. Thomas set down her bag without a word, then gestured toward the table. A pot of stew waited bread, still warm from the oven. The children didn't wait for permission. They crowded around, filling bowls and passing spoons with practiced chaos. Clara sat slowly, hands trembling. It had been weeks since she had eaten more than scraps. She tried to take only a little, but Thomas's deep voice cut in, gently. Eat. You'll need strength. She raised her eyes surprised. He wasn't looking at her with pity, only practicality, as though food was her right, not a gift. The children chattered on, asking questions now. Where are you from? Do you know how to sew? Can you tell stories? Clara smiled, faintly cautious. New York, she answered softly. And yes, I can sew. I can tell a story or two if you don't mind it being old-fashioned. Old-fashioned's the best kind, said the eldest boy, his voice firm as though he were already shouldering the mantle of manhood. For the first time in years, Clara told a story. It was a simple tale of a girl who planted a rose bush in an empty yard, and though the neighbors mocked her in time, the roses bloomed brighter than any flower in town. The children listened, eyes wide. Even Thomas paused by the fire, one hand resting on the mantle, listening without interruption. When she finished, silence hung for a moment. Then the children burst into applause, not polite but joyous. Clara's cheeks flushed, her hands trembled. She had forgotten what it felt like to be heard. Later, when the children had gone to bed, Thomas offered her a small room at the back of the house. The quilt on the bed was patched but clean, smelling faintly of lavender. Clara touched it with reverence, her throat tight. You can stay as long as you need, Thomas said quietly from the doorway. His voice carried no pressure, no hidden bargain, only steadiness. Clara met his eyes. They were dark with exhaustion but softened by something she couldn't name. Gratitude, perhaps, or recognition. Just until morning, she whispered again, though. In her heart, the words rang hollow. When he left her, she sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in many nights, she prayed not for escape, but for rest. And when she lay down, the house murmured around her, the creak of wood, the sigh of wind, the faint laugh of children down the hall. A lullaby she had never known she needed. Clara closed her eyes. Sleep came quickly, carrying with it something dangerously close to hope. Clara told herself she would leave at dawn. But what happens when morning brings not rejection, but belonging? The dawn crept softly into Thomas's ranch. Light filtered through thin curtains, painting the small room in shades of pale gold. Clara stirred awake, confused for a moment by the sound of children's laughter outside. She was not in a train station, not in the cold street, not in the corner of a barn where she had once hidden for shelter. She was in a bed, a clean, warm bed. Her first instinct was to rise quickly, gather her carpet bag, and leave before anyone could change their mind. She had learned long ago that kindness rarely lasted. It flickered like a candle, and sooner or later, someone always blew it out. But before she could move, a knock came. It was light, almost hesitant. Then a child's voice, small, eager. Miss Clara, breakfast is ready. Her chest tightened. For years, she had been called by names sharp as whips, burden, too much useless. Now Miss Clara sounded almost like respect. When she entered the kitchen, the children were already gathered around the table. Thomas poured coffee, his movements steady, quiet. A chair had been left open for her. The littlest girl grinned, patting the seat beside her. Clara sat slowly, her hands trembling. Bread, eggs, and porridge filled the table. The children talked over one another with careless joy. Thomas said little, but Clara noticed how he served her first, as though without thought. It should have comforted her. Instead, suspicion gnawed at her. Why are they being kind? After breakfast, Clara tried to help with chores, sweeping, mending, feeding the chickens. The children followed her like shadows, fascinated. She sewed a button back onto the eldest boy's shirt, and his stiff posture softened into a grateful smile. She baked bread, and the smell filled the ranch with warmth. But as she worked, Clara's doubts grew heavier. This isn't my home, she reminded herself. They will grow tired of me. They will see I am not good enough. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Clara stood by the window, staring at the moon rising over the plains. Thomas approached quietly. For a long while, neither spoke. Then his voice broke the silence. They already love you, you know. Clara startled. They don't even know me. Children don't need years to know, Thomas said gently. They see what grown folk forget to look for. Clara turned away, her throat tight. You don't know me either. Thomas's gaze did not waver. Maybe not all of you, but I know enough. Her anger flared, anger born of fear. Enough to what? To pity me. To let me stay a few days until I'm strong enough to leave. Thomas's face shifted, a shadow of pain flickering in his eyes. Clara, I don't offer pity. I offer respect. And a place if you'll take it. Nothing more, nothing less. The words should have soothed her. Instead, they reopened old wounds. She remembered her in-laws after her husband's death. Cold eyes, harsh voices. You're not family anymore. You're nothing but another mouth to feed. She remembered neighbors who whispered behind her back, mocking her limp, her shape, her solitude. Who'd want her, the memory pressed like iron on her chest. She stepped back, shaking her head. I can't, I can't trust this. I've been turned away too many times. Every time I believed someone, I lost everything. Thomas looked at her for a long moment, then lowered his eyes. I won't force you. If you need to leave, the gates open. But if you stay, it won't be as a burden. It will be as part of this family. His calm words rattled her more than anger would have. She wanted him to push, to demand, to prove her suspicions right. Instead, he left her with choice, a gift she no longer knew how to carry. That night, Clara could not sleep. The house around her was quiet, filled with the breath of 7 children sleeping safely. She sat by the window until dawn, torn between running and staying. For the first time, she asked herself not what others expected, but what she wanted. Clara's heart longed for belonging, but her wounds screamed for escape. Would she choose to run from kindness or dare to risk hope again? The days stretched into weeks, and Clara's body remained at Thomas's ranch, but her heart was caught between two worlds, between the safety of leaving and the risk of staying. Each morning she rose before the sun, driven by the rhythm of survival she had known for years. She kneaded dough until her arms ached, hung laundry until her fingers went numb in the cold air, patched shirts and stockings until candlelight burned low. The children adored her small acts of care. They began to wait at the table for her bread, to line up for mended clothes, to run to her with school recitations and broken toys. On the surface, Clara belonged, but inside her fears twisted tighter. They will see the real me soon enough, she thought, and when they do, they will cast me aside like everyone else has. One evening, as she swept the floor, she overheard the older boys whispering. She works hard, one said. She's better than Mrs. Carter, the other replied. Remember how she left after 2 weeks? She might stay, the first added. Don't say that, the other hushed. If she leaves, it'll hurt the little ones too much. Clara froze, the broom trembling in her hands. Their words were not cruel, but they pierced her. If she leaves, as though departure were inevitable. She pressed her lips together and swept harder, trying to bury the ache. That night when the children slept, Thomas lingered by the hearth, watching the fire burn low. Clara sat across the room, her sewing basket in her lap. The silence stretched until it was unbearable. Finally she spoke. You should find someone younger, stronger, someone who won't limp when she walks or tire so quickly. Thomas looked up slowly, his eyes steady. Why would I need someone younger? Because I am not enough, Clara said bitterly. I never have been. My in-laws told me so when they left me at the gate. My neighbors said it when they watched me limp home alone. And the men at the station said it with their laughter. I know what I am. Her voice cracked and she dropped her sewing, her hands trembling. Don't you see, I don't want your pity. If I stay, it must not be pity. Thomas's gaze softened and he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Clara, do you think pity drives a man to trust someone with his children? Do you think pity asks for your bread, your stories, your patience with their noise? Pity is weak. What I see in you is strength. Clara shook her head, tears brimming. Strength, she whispered. Yes, Thomas said firmly. Strength is living when the world tries to bury you. Strength is showing kindness when you've only been shown cruelty. Strength is waking each day broken and tired and still giving love. That is what I see when I look at you. The words struck deep, but Clara's scars did not let go easily. She turned away, hiding her tears in the shadows. That week, the tension inside her grew unbearable. She began to dream of leaving, of slipping away before dawn with her carpet bag. Yet every time she pictured the road, she saw the faces of the children, the littlest girl holding her hand, the eldest boy silently watching her, Thomas's steady eyes at the doorway. Her heart ached with a question she had long suppressed. Do I want to be loved, or am I too afraid to risk it? One night a storm rolled in across the plains. The wind screamed through the rafters, rain pounded against the windows, and thunder shook the walls. The children crowded into the main room, frightened. Clara gathered them close, her arms wrapping around the smallest ones. She told them stories to drown out the storm tales of wildflowers that bloomed after floods, of birds that found their way home after long winters. Her voice was calm, though her own heart quaked. Thomas watched from the doorway, lantern in hand. The sight of Clara holding his children as though they were her own struck him with such force that he had to grip the doorframe. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt peace, a fragile but undeniable peace. When the storm passed and the children finally fell asleep against Clara's skirts, Thomas stepped forward. His voice was low, rough with emotion. "You don't see it yet, Clara," he said, "but you already belong here." Clara looked down at the sleeping children, then up at Thomas. Her throat closed with unspoken words. She wanted to believe him. She longed to. But fear still clung to her heart like chains. That night alone in her small room, she whispered into the dark, "If I stay, will they still want me when they see all of me?" Her question was swallowed by silence, but in her heart something stirred, a tiny flicker of hope, fighting against years of despair. Clara's doubts still chained her, yet the children's trust and Thomas's steady kindness were breaking through the cracks. Would she dare to risk her heart and discover if belonging could finally be hers? The days after the storm passed quietly, but something had shifted inside Clara. She could not ignore the warmth she had felt, the way the children clung to her, as if she were already their mother, or the look in Thomas's eyes when he told her she belonged. Yet still the chains of old shame tugged at her, whispering she was unworthy. Her life had taught her one lesson above all: nothing good lasts. People leave, promises fade, and a woman like her, too plain, too worn, too imperfect, was never chosen. The cruel echoes of her past refused to die. But life on the ranch left little time for brooding. Spring was arriving and the land demanded attention. Fences needed mending, seeds had to be sown, calves were being born in the pasture. Clara threw herself into the work, determined to contribute. She worked until her hands cracked and her back ached, but even in weariness, she discovered something new: purpose. One afternoon, while carrying water from the well, Clara's limp worsened. The old injury in her leg throbbed fiercely, and the bucket slipped from her grasp, splashing into the dirt. She sank to her knees, clutching her skirt, humiliated. The eldest boy, Samuel, rushed to her side. "Don't try to carry it, Miss Clara," he said. "I'll do it." Clara shook her head stubbornly. "No, Samuel, I can." But the boy gently took the bucket from her hand, his young face filled with a maturity far beyond his years. "You've already done more than we ever hoped for," he whispered. "Let me help you just this once." Tears stung her eyes. It was not pity, it was partnership. And in that moment she realized this home was teaching her what her old life never had, that love was not weakness, but shared strength. The arrival of the past. But peace is fragile, and shadows from the past have a way of finding the light. One Saturday morning, while Clara hung laundry in the yard, a wagon rattled down the dirt road. On it sat two figures she recognized instantly, her late husband's brothers. They had once cast her aside like unwanted baggage, leaving her with nothing but a newborn at the gate of her old home. The sight of them drained the color from her face. They dismounted, sneering, as they looked around Thomas's land. One called out, "So this is where you ended up, Clara. We heard some fool rancher took you in. Figures you always knew how to play the part of a helpless widow." The words struck like a whip. Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to shrink into herself to hide from their venom. But before she could answer, Thomas stepped out from the barn, his shoulders squared, his eyes steady. "She's not helpless," he said firmly. "She's the reason this ranch has run smoother than it has in years. And she's under my protection." The brothers scoffed. "Protection? You don't know her like we do. She's a burden, nothing but a limp and a mouth to feed." Clara trembled, shame crashing over her like waves. For a moment she almost believed their lies again. But then she felt it, the tug of 7 small hands. The children had gathered around her silently, their faces fierce, their little bodies forming a shield. One of the girls, barely 8 years old, lifted her chin and said with trembling courage, "Don't you talk to Mama like that." The word Mama echoed like a bell through the yard. Clara's heart stopped. Tears welled in her eyes. They had chosen her. Not out of pity, but out of love. Thomas's voice deepened. You heard her. This is their mother now, and my wife-to-be. If you came here to insult her, you'd best be on your way. The brothers hesitated. The power of Thomas's calm resolve, the children's unity, and Clara's unshaken presence left them silent. Finally, with muttered curses, they climbed back onto their wagon and turned down the road, their jeers fading into the distance. The moment of release. When the dust settled, Clara stood trembling, her chest rising and falling in heavy breaths. She expected her knees to give way for the weight of shame to crush her, but instead something broke. Not her spirit, the chains. For years she had carried the cruel words of others like stones in a sack, each one weighing her down. But here before Thomas, before the children, before the very men who had abandoned her, she had not fallen. She had been defended. She had been claimed. And most of all, she had been loved. Thomas stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. You see now, he whispered. They don't decide your worth. You do. And to us, you are more than enough. Clara's tears fell freely, but for once they were not bitter. They were cleansing, washing away years of torment. She knelt and pulled the children close, her arms encircling them. Thank you, she whispered into their hair. Thank you for seeing me. For the first time, Clara felt the true meaning of release. Not escape from pain, but freedom to live beyond it. Evening by the fire. That night the family gathered by the fire. The storm outside had passed, but Clara's heart still glowed with the warmth of what had happened. She sewed quietly while the children played, and Thomas sat beside her, mending a harness. After a long silence, he spoke. Clara, I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know this: I want you by my side for the rest of my days. She looked up startled, but in his steady gaze she saw no pity, no desperation, only respect, only love. Her lips trembled into a small smile. Then maybe tomorrow, I'll stop waiting for the other shoe to fall. Maybe tomorrow I'll believe this is real. Thomas reached for her hand, rough and calloused, meeting hers worn but strong. It's real, he said softly. And for the first time in 50 years, Clara let herself believe it. Clara had been claimed not as a burden, but as family. The shadows of her past had lost their grip, but could her heart truly learn to live in the light? The days that followed the confrontation with her past felt different. For years, Clara had walked through life expecting the ground to crumble beneath her feet. But now for the first time she felt steady, as though she had finally found solid earth to stand on. The children clung to her more than ever. At breakfast, little Martha slipped into her lap as though it were the most natural place in the world. Samuel, once shy and withdrawn, began to tell her stories about the ranch, how his father had taught him to break a horse, how he dreamed of building a barn of his own one day. Each of the 7 children, in their own quiet way, claimed her not just as a caretaker, but as their own mother. And Clara, who had once lived in silence, found her voice returning. She sang softly while baking bread. She hummed lullabies as she rocked the youngest Anna to sleep. The sound surprised her at first. She had not sung in decades. But now in this home, music rose from her like water breaking through stone. A quiet evening. One evening after the children had gone to bed, Clara stepped outside. The prairie stretched wide and silver beneath the moonlight. The barn stood tall against the horizon, and the steady hum of crickets filled the air. Thomas joined her, his boots crunching softly against the dirt. He carried 2 mugs of coffee, one of which he handed to her without a word. They stood side by side, watching the stars. Finally, Clara spoke. Her voice trembled, but it was steady enough to carry the truth she had long buried. Thomas, I have lived most of my life being told I wasn't enough. Too big, too plain, too weak. Even when I tried my hardest, it was never enough. Thomas turned to her, his face lit by the pale glow of the moon. And do you still believe that? Clara swallowed. For years, the answer would have been yes. But now, standing here, she thought of the children's voices calling her Mama. She thought of Thomas tearing up the cruel words of her past. She thought of the way the ranch felt alive when she walked through it, not because she was perfect, but because she gave her heart. No, she whispered, not anymore. Thomas's eyes softened. Slowly he reached for her hand. That's all I needed to hear. The festival spring brought with it the small-town festival in the nearby settlement. It was the first time in years Clara had attended such a gathering. She hesitated at the thought of going. Memories of judgmental stares and whispered ridicule still haunted her. But the children begged and Thomas insisted. "You've hidden long enough," he said gently. "Come with us. You'll see." At the festival, laughter and music filled the air. The children ran to play games, chasing ribbons and tossing hoops. Clara walked beside Thomas, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders. She felt the eyes on her, the same measuring, judging looks she had known all her life. Then from somewhere in the crowd she heard it. A mutter. "Look at her. He could have had any woman, but he chose her." The words hit like old wounds torn open. Clara froze, her chest tightening. But before she could shrink away, Thomas's voice rang out, steady, calm, unashamed. "She's my wife now," he said loudly enough for all to hear. "And she's the best woman I've ever known." The crowd hushed. Some turned away awkwardly. Others glanced at Clara with surprise. And for once she did not lower her head. She stood tall, her hand firmly in Thomas's, and let his words wrap around her like armor. In that moment she realized something she had never truly believed before: she was not alone. She would never be alone again. A mother's love. That summer the ranch thrived. Fields flourished, the herd grew strong, and laughter filled the home. But it was the children who showed Clara her greatest healing. One afternoon she found Lily, the middle child, crying by the well. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Clara asked, kneeling despite the ache in her leg. The girl sniffled. I was afraid you might leave. Like before." Clara's heart broke. She lifted the child into her arms and held her tight. "Oh, Lily," she whispered, "I will never leave. Not as long as I have breath in me. You are mine, all of you, and I am yours." The child buried her face in Clara's neck, her small arms clinging tight. In that embrace, Clara felt the last pieces of her old fear melt away. She was not just surviving anymore. She was living. The healing flame. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Thomas built a fire in the hearth. He sat across from Clara, his gaze steady, his hands resting on his knees. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "We started out of necessity, you and I. Two broken people trying to piece together a life. But somewhere along the way it changed." Clara's heart raced. Changed. How? Thomas leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Clara, I don't want you here out of gratitude or duty or because the children need you. I want you here because I love you, and because I cannot imagine a life without you." Clara's breath caught. Love. The word she had long buried, long feared, was now spoken not as a promise to break, but as a truth revealed. Tears filled her eyes. For so long she had wondered if she was capable of being loved, truly loved. And now here it was. "I love you too, Thomas," she whispered. The fire crackled. The night deepened. And in that quiet moment, two broken hearts, long suppressed, finally healed in the warmth of each other's love. Clara had found not only a home, but a love she had thought forever out of reach. Yet the greatest question still remained: could she fully embrace this new life and believe that it was truly hers to keep? The first light of dawn crept across the Montana sky, painting the hills with strokes of gold and rose. Clara stood by the window, watching the mist drift lazily over the fields. Behind her, the soft laughter of children spilled from the kitchen, mingling with the smell of bread baking. For the first time in decades, Clara felt the quiet certainty of belonging. Life had not become easy. The ranch demanded long days mending fences, tending cattle, cooking for 9 mouths, comforting little ones through fevers and fears. Yet Clara did not see the work as a burden. Each chore became an offering, a way of planting love into the soil of her new family. The children, once scattered and restless, clung to her presence. Samuel asked for her advice before starting his chores. Anna, the youngest, curled into her lap each night, refusing to sleep unless Clara sang softly. Even the older ones, once guarded, once suspicious, now sought her approval with shy smiles. She had not only gained a family, she had become the heart of it. Thomas, too, had changed. Once silent, weighed down by grief and loneliness, he now carried himself with quiet joy. Clara often caught him watching her with a look that needed no words: gratitude, admiration, and something even deeper, love. He was no longer a man surviving. He was a man living again. One evening, as the sun sank in a blaze of crimson, Thomas took her hand and led her outside. The children followed, tumbling over one another with laughter until all 9 of them stood on the ridge overlooking the ranch. This land was built on hard work, Thomas said, his voice steady. But a house without love is just wood and nails. You, Clara, you gave us more than a home. You gave us a family again. Clara's throat tightened. For years she had been told she was too much, not enough a burden. But here on this ridge with the children circling her like the orbit of stars, she felt the truth settle deep in her chest. She was exactly where she was meant to be. I didn't save you, she whispered, tears brimming. You all saved me. Thomas bent and kissed her hand, rough and gentle all at once. The children wrapped their arms around her waist, shouting, as if declaring it to the sky, Mama, Mama, stay forever. Clara laughed through her tears. And for the first time in her 50 years, the laughter was free, unashamed, and whole. The ranch was not grand, nor was life without struggle. But within its weathered walls, Clara had found what she thought forever lost: love, dignity, and hope. And in her heart she carried the unshakable truth that it is never too late to be chosen, not for what the world sees, but for who you truly are. From a woman abandoned and mocked to the heart of a family, Clara's story reminds us that sometimes love comes not in youth, but in the quiet years when we need it most. But what challenges will this new family face next, and how will Clara's strength carry them forward? In the end, Clara's journey was never just about finding shelter. It was about discovering that even after the deepest rejection, love can still arrive in the most unexpected form. She was not saved by wealth or power or promises written on paper. She was saved by kindness, by the small voices of 7 children who simply said, stay. And maybe that is the lesson for all of us. Life may strip us down with loss, with loneliness, with cruel words we carry far too long. But healing often comes in the quiet moments, in the simple gestures that remind us we still belong. Sometimes it is a hand reaching out in the dark. Sometimes it is the courage to accept love when it finally arrives. If you carry old wounds, remember, your worth is not defined by those who mocked you, but by the love you choose to give and the love you allow yourself to receive. This story is part of None, Wild West Saga, where we believe the West was not only built on grit and hardship, but also on grace, compassion, and second chances. If Clara's story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone who might need it, and leave a comment below. Would you like to see what happens next in her life, or hear more stories of quiet strength and unexpected love from the frontier? I'll be here waiting to tell you the next chapter.